Yo, how you doing, folks? Welcome to this episode of the Simpa Life. We are episode 104. Actually got the hand gesture right this week. You'll be happy to know I've only got one more episode to be able to do that next week, and then gonna have to figure out a new way to introduce these episodes. Anyway, folks, I hope you've had a good week. It's been actually a bit of a long week. It's probably been about 10 days since we've seen each other. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode. If you haven't, go back and give it a watch because it is well worth it. I've got a hell of a guest for you this week, somebody that I've known for quite a while, for quite a while. We happen to have both frequented and written for a similar, for the same publication rather. And looking at her extensive work within this field, she is one hell of a writer, very prolific. I thought I wrote a lot on the subject, but Jesus. Very much looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, we'll introduce today's guest, who is an American published author, cannabis writer for many outlets, which we'll cover shortly, TV producer and host, apothecary, and breast cancer survivor. They are Sharon Letts. How are you doing, Sharon?
Hey, I'm so happy to be here, talking to my people across the pond.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for making the time to talk with us. Like I sort of said in the intro there, or crudely touched on in the intro, you've written for quite a lot of different outlets. I'm looking at your website, sharonletts.com now, and even just your current series that you have active across what, 7, 8 different 7 different publications.
Yeah. I write because I come from television. I'm a storyteller. I did documentary work and TV. And so I've always done series. Even when I was in newspapers up in Humboldt, I've done series. I like to do series of stories. And so, yeah, 7 active series right now. And I've written prolifically for 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I suppose let's... my usual question here, I suppose, for guests is sort of when and how you first got involved with cannabis. So I suppose, as you were kind of alluding to when we were talking before we started recording, you've kind of transitioned from what I suppose you termed there the mainstream into sort of cannabis. So could you tell us about that and how that sort of came about?
I have 2 stories. I usually just tell the mainstream to cannabis one, but I'll start today with my gardening since I'm talking to my people in England. I'm British from both sides of my family aisle. I think in a past life I was in charge of a kitchen garden, maybe in a big house somewhere in the countryside. So I'm very much akin to England. I'm so happy to talk to you guys. But so I became a gardener actually at 24. I did flower beds. For well-to-do people. It was an extravagance and nice neighborhoods. And I parlayed that into television. I did a gardening show for local access in Southern California for 3 years. And then I parlayed that into raising my own funds and executive producing a series for PBS in California, a little travel series. And then I ended up in Los Angeles working on national television projects, magazine shows for like the History Channel and stuff like that. And then I was brought up to Humboldt County. So I was in mainstream media, TV and film, and I was brought up to Humboldt County to produce a news show for local access up there. And my daughter wanted to follow her boyfriend up to Humboldt for college. So I thought now's the time for us to leave the city and have a smaller life in the rural area, which I was called to. But as it turned out, and an energy worker has confirmed, God took me with a voice from Los Angeles, dropped me in Humboldt in media, and then gave me breast cancer. And Pearl Moon, a 30-year back to the lander, they called them back to the landers in the 60s. They left the summer of love San Francisco and traveled north to Northern California and started growing cannabis. And she was a 30-year medicine maker. She got wind that Sharon Letts, because I had been lead feature writer at the Times Standard, so people knew who I was. And I was progressive writer. I wrote about environmental issues and gardening and farming. So she knew I was copacetic to the plant, maybe. So she came and brought me the cannabis oil, that's been known to put cancer and serious ailments into remission. Of course, I didn't know anything. I was a stoner from the 70s, but my first thing was, if this works, how come I don't know about it? And, of course, she probably said something like, well, that's a really good question. It's all politics. And that first night I took the oil. And if you're not familiar with the cannabis oil, it's alcohol reduction, very strong. It measures upwards of 80% activated THC because we know that THC is one of the compounds that kills cancer cells, along with the entourage of all the other more than 400 beneficial compounds within the plant. And so that first night, no sleeping pill. And that's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States. I was in mainstream media. That was not lost on me. The next day, it replaced my painkillers. I had knee issues. I had hormonal depression with thyroid disease, menopause, a lot of female issues at that time. I was in my late 50s at that time, early 50s at that time. So in 2.5 weeks, upwards of 10 pharmaceuticals were gone, replaced by the oil. And in 2.5 months, the cancer was gone. And so I had no choice. It was a calling. I had no choice. I was called to do this. I crossed over. I've been writing ever since, 10 years October, for cannabis magazines around the world.
Wow.
With a focus on patient profiles. And I think I'm the only one that does that, because we're made to call them anecdotal stories. They're not, believed, because in the United States and many countries, it's still not considered medicine. So, yeah, very controversial.
Indeed. I often speak, I've done a few episodes on this podcast where we end up talking about determinism and fate and all of these sorts of things. And I don't necessarily know fully where I lay on these things. But it does seem like you accrued this skill set and this knowledge base and all of this experience. And then you arrived in a place where I would say that it's most beneficial, but you were transitioned so fast from that kind of mainstream world into then this alternative reality that we all live in, where exactly that none of this is true, none of this is confirmed. We're all just anecdotally illegally alive. We've illegally healed ourselves and continue to take autonomy of healthcare.
That's my hashtag, illegally healed. Yeah.
Nice. That's a hashtag that's got some legs on it. A lot of people use it because I think it's something that resonates with a lot of people, is this idea that, as you spoke of there, well, if this works, and in your case, clearly it has worked, why hadn't you heard of it? And it's even with people like yourself that are so prolific in writing about it, people still just don't know.
Because the U.S. government has it listed on Schedule 1 with the Department of Health alongside heroin having no medicinal value, and everyone knows that's not true. So it's one of the great hypocrisies in the U.S. today with this plant. And, I wasn't allowed. I was a writer. I was lead feature writer in Humboldt County at the top, 150-plus-year-old newspaper, the Times Standard. And I was not allowed to write about cannabis as medicine, and I had a focus on environmental issues and farming and plants and things, and I couldn't write. The only time cannabis was in the Times Standard was on the front page and noted in the crime section, and they put a green leaf on the front page at the top of the front page, and that would be the highest selling issue of the week or whatever. But it was always about criminal, federally criminal things, not anything positive about the medical market that was legal at that time. I couldn't think about it. So very, very frustrating for me crossing over mainstream, especially being 10 years now. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of cannabis patients that have successful outcomes with serious ailments, and nothing's changed. 10 years, here I am, it's like, sorry, I have no regrets. I've helped a lot of people. But even in my personal life, friends and neighbors and things like that, they're not on board. I could talk my little voice till I'm blue in the face. And everyone has their journey and their path. Sometimes this plant isn't on their journey and they have to do something else. I don't know why I was called to do this. I mean, it was like my path was forged, though, because I was a gardener first. I had an understanding of gardening and environmental issues and all that. And then once I crossed over from mainstream, my God, I'd be interviewing some government official or someone high up in something, and they'd start telling me things off the record. Well, you can't write about this, but since you've crossed over, from mainstream, and now there's some lies out there, we're going to tell you everything now. Or one day, this guy started telling me things about extraterrestrials. I'm like, oh my God, I cannot unhear. So, it just opens the door for all the stuff that we've been lied to about.
It's an interesting one in that it's a binary. It creates a binary reality in that because cannabis doesn't fit into the mainstream, it falls into the realm of everything else.
Alternative.
Yeah, and alternative.
Pharmaceuticals are the true alternative medical industry. Pharmaceuticals have only been around since the late 1930s. I just finished a story on bitters for Las Vegas Cannabis Magazine and Tahoe Cannabis Magazine. They're owned by the same publisher, on bitters. And bitters were the first, again, I think from England, or maybe it was Spain. I can't remember. But anyway, bitters were the first tincture. Bitters were created for medicine. And, think about it. They're all beneficial foods in there, not just, my hashtag also is not just cannabis. And I like to say that cannabis was my gateway drug to other healing plants, because cannabinoids aren't just in cannabis. Cannabinoids and terpenes, where the medicine is held in beneficial plants, are in all beneficial plants. I mean, beneficial plants have scents because we have noses. It's a symbiotic relationship that we've been pulled away from the garden now for years, decades. So the pharmaceutical industry is relatively new and experimental, whereas making medicine with plants that feed into all of our biological systems naturally, the way it was intended, has been around for thousands of years. So we really got bamboozled by the pharma industry, and I would never say to anyone, don't do pharma. I'm privileged in my knowledge. I've come across this, hard. It's been a tough 10 years being in this space. I was respected in mainstream media, right? So it's been tough, but it's truth. It's truth. So.
Yeah, you raise a valid point about pharmaceuticals being the real alternative, because in the entirety of human history, we have always had that symbiotic relation with the botanicals around us. We look at any of the indigenous, sorry, my camera's going crazy. Any of the indigenous.
You've got a poltergeist in your camera this morning.
Yeah, these gremlins are back. They're here some weeks, so the weeks they take the week off. I guess this week back in the office. But we've kind of had, as you said, the wool pulled over our eyes, and it kind of all comes down to the creation of the hypodermic needle, sort of in the mid 1800s. And before that, there wasn't really the delivery system for these purer drugs. Once they then got to this, I mean, the joke of it is, so here's a nice anecdote, which is going to be part of, I'm doing a series at the minute, but I'm about 3 months in pause on a video of one. And it's basically I'm trying to prove this conceptual idea that I've got, this kind of a fear that I have about what's happening.
We're paused right now?
No, we're on recording.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. So the series that I'm working on is basically, I'm calling it the Great Medical Cannabis Con, and it's the idea that the compound word of medical cannabis, that this is the pharmaceutical industry trying to steal cannabis from the people. So they're making us call it medical cannabis rather than cannabis, so that it creates a juxtaposition. So that medical cannabis is the healing one, and cannabis is the dangerous one. So in the UK, our media right now. Sorry, go on.
We could say the same thing about organic food. Why don't we just call it food and then the other stuff poison? Tainted.
Exactly. Yeah.
I hashtag that one stupid human tricks. I mean, it's just so silly. Right?
It's basic marketing. It comes from that same thing with the hypodermic needle. And sorry, go on.
If I could comment on the hypodermic, did you read about the hypodermic needle from one of my pieces? I wonder. Is that what you?
I don't think so. It's part of. I've written it's. I've got a 5,000 word script for a 20-minute video. Why is 5,000 words? I do not know. But it's because I'm researching to try and basically. I've got this theory that. Opium was quite benign, and it was in the populace, and everyone could take it. You could make tinctures, you could smoke it, you could do whatever the hell you wanted with it until the early 1800s. There's a few instances of prohibition around the world in other areas, but they're typically religious zealotism, not necessarily this movement by science to criminalize the compounds. Then they took opium and went, all right, we can make a tincture of this, and they made laudanum. Then everyone got really fucked up on the laudanum, and then they were like, all right, we're going to make an extract from this, and they made morphine. Morphine then became, I think, 5 times stronger than opium. Then everyone became morphine addicts. Sorry about that, folks. My computer just buzzed in my ear for some reason, which means it'll be on the recording. Sorry. They then made this thing, it's 5 times stronger than opium with morphine, then started morphine addicts. They then created the hypodermic needle, and Bayer produced heroin. which is diamorphine, pure heroin, and they marketed it as a child's cough syrup and a cough suppressant and all sorts of, it was easily readily available. Then obviously people became addicted to that, and then they replaced heroin with fentanyl. Then they've replaced fentanyl with carfentanil. So carfentanil is now 10,000 times stronger than the opium plant. And I worry that this is the direction and trajectory that they're going with cannabis, because at the same time that there's these opioids available, you can't just make an opium tea. You can't just smoke some extracted opium in the same way you'd be highly criminalized. Yet then it's all right for you to go and get an Oxycontin addiction as long as you're saying the right things to your doctor and paying the right prices. Right. And that's why
I can comment on this whole thing, and I can also relieve some of your theories on the hypodermic thing and morphine and all that, because I actually wrote a huge feature on this, but the web has been so bleached with the transference of going from apothecary being demonized into pharmaceutical industry that it was really hard for me to find a bunch of stuff, and I got a lot of stuff wrong. So it was never published. I still have to work on it. But I did a deep dive on all of it. And the thing is, morphine, cannabis oil was used for surgery and pain. Prior to the 20th century, 19th century, all the way back. It was used on the Civil War battlefield, cannabis oil for surgery. They didn't have the morphine readily available then. The first Surgeon General named in the United States was named right after the Civil War, and he wasn't called Surgeon General. The first Surgeon General in the United States was called the Apothecary General. And about this too. And the reason that the hypodermic needle is tied to the, the addictions that followed with morphine and laudanum is because at that time, they did not know how to make cannabis oil water soluble. So when Sears and Roebuck offered up the hypodermic needle in its catalog for home use, they only could offer up morphine, which was made to be water soluble. Now we can make cannabis oil water soluble, we can make it water soluble now, but they didn't have that then. So that little teeny technicality is what changed things. And I actually found letters from surgeons and doctors from that time begging, please don't take our cannabis oil away from us. Our patients don't get addicted to it like they do morphine. They're more aware, especially for end-of-life care, even today, using cannabis oil over morphine. When the cancer patient that's on their way out starts using morphine, they're already gone. Gone. Cannabis oil, they're still present. So so this started happening because of the hypodermic needle. Excellent point. And then they went into, there's a film you can watch with Katharine Hepburn. It was made in the late 1930s. It was based on a play, Long Day's Journey into Night. And it shows the addiction of morphine. Katharine Hepburn is a mother who got onto morphine after a difficult childbirth. And at that time, I was in the late 1930s, and they were talking about it. So anyway, yeah, it was a big deal. And the thing is about fentanyl and all that, the opioids today, it's supply and demand. They know what we like. Valium is powdered alcohol. They know what we like. They know what humans like to abuse, okay? The fentanyl, yeah, heroin and opioids are the same thing. They know. I mean, they're marketing, they're in it for the money. So yeah, there's some evilness there to the whole thing, but it's supply and demand. My thing is harm reduction. My thing is education. How do you know that chamomile concentrate will replace Valium for you? How would anyone know that? I discovered it on accident. So, like I said, cannabis was my gateway to other plants, right? So chamomile replaced Valium for me. Valium is such a problem. It's powdered alcohol, and so many people are addicted to it for that chill, right? So yeah, things like that. It's just, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. Education is what helps people do the right kind of drugs to feel better, because I don't think there's criminals doing drugs. I think people are self-medicating to feel better. And then what is none of our fucking business. Sorry, can I say the F word on your show?
Swear as much as you want.
And, it's none of our business better than what, but people need to be educated on healthier options. Cannabis oil was part of plant-assisted therapy for addiction recovery. I wrote about it for Weed World extensively. And the treatment center in Maine that was highly successful in doing this with kratom and cannabis and chamomile was shut down because they couldn't get into the healthcare system. People had to pay cash. And then the FDA took cannabis off of the list of medicines or whatever substances you can use in addiction recovery. Mm-hmm. So, it's just 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
I think it's all about education. Mm-hmm. I refuse to think that the pharmaceutical companies are evil and are doing all these things on purpose. It's their business. It's a huge monster of a business. They would love to do cannabis if they could. You can't patent an entire plant. We need the whole plant for a lot of this stuff. So that's why you see them breaking down the compounds and formulating, because you can only patent for profit a formulation.
Mm-hmm. But you can patent the extraction process as well. There's obviously still an ongoing lawsuit between Canopy Growth and GW about their CO2 extraction, which
oh my God, is that still going on? I had no idea it was still going on.
Yeah, I haven't seen a verdict on it, and I've got enough like Google alerts and email alerts set up that I'd like to think I'll see a judgment on it, because it has potential to set sort of serious precedent in the space. But yeah, thank you for covering quite a lot of that. It's interesting because I've been like similar deep diving into a lot of this, because the UK, especially Scotland and England, has a very storied history with cannabis medications and the production and use of cannabis as a medicine. So we are the nation of skunk psychosis, which, if you believe the rumors, I'll put allegedly here just so that I don't get sued by GW, that they are responsible for creating the term skunk psychosis and for proliferating in the British media this idea of skunk weed, this super strong skunk cannabis, which basically means good quality floral cannabis, because we'd obviously traditionally had a hash market in the UK for a long time. And then in sort of the early noughties, actually a bit before that, we just started to really get a homegrown system set up. And when the so-called air quote hemp laws were relaxed in the UK, this led to more domestic cultivation, and we've ended up reducing export. Export is catching up a bit more to home grow, just because of demand for other products at the minute. But yeah, this is then sorry.
If I could touch on the psychosis part. So I've written extensively on this. A psychiatrist, I can't remember all the names of the places she's associated with. She came out with a book in America this last year called Your Brain on Cannabis, or maybe marijuana. I don't know what word she used. I hope it was cannabis. Maybe not.
I hope it was cannabis.
She went into Your Brain on Cannabis as best she could, using studies available to her and things like this, and many anecdotal stories. So I wrote her profile, but because 10 years of interviewing patients and hearing successful stories and outcomes, and knowing that some of these studies are skewed, they're narrowly done for negative outcomes. The National Institute of Drug Abuse in America has funded many studies. If they have positive outcomes, they're shelved. And there's many instances. The study I wrote about in Jamaica on pregnancy is one that I've written about for Weed World, where it was supposed to last 20 years with these kids, and they shelved it at 5 years because the kids were just doing very well. So where was I with this? I want to back up. How did I start this? I sidetracked.
Just touching on the psychosis and cannabis.
Okay, thank you. So that study, the studies where they keep saying, and they politicize it, right? Every time there's a campaign coming, politicians say, what about the children? Your frontal lobe isn't developed till you're 24. If kids, smoke weed, they're going to be crazy. Well, I was 16 when I started. I am not crazy. I'm not psychotic. I'm not neurotic, right? So we would see a lot more psychosis and neuroses if that were true. But to back up further and take a look at this study, because when you see a headline like that, and they don't tell you the perimeters of that study, that's criminal in itself. So the study that they're citing, they took a THC formulation, high THC formulation, and they injected it into the frontal lobe of mice. Now, I don't know about you, But if I was injected today with a high THC formulation into my frontal lobe right now, I think I'd be psychotic. I think I'd be neurotic. I think I'd have some episodes. So, you really have to dig into some of these studies. We don't have psychosis and neuroses in our society because of cannabis. Okay, we just don't. So for them to keep using that is just...
Yeah, but that's the point of it, is that that's sort of what I was juxtaposing there was the anecdotes of I'm setting up versus GW's in the current reality of, that still in the UK now, it's been legal on prescription cannabis via the clinics. About 20,000 odd people have it. Yet the media is still skunk. So there's the good one, prescription, or they're terming it medical cannabis. Capital M, capital C, so it's a proper noun, creates a new compound term because they've made a different legislation. So in the UK, cannabis is dual listed. So it's Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, and a cannabis preparation is Schedule 4. So if you get caught with cannabis and you've got the prescription and it's their product, it's Schedule 2. But if you grow cannabis and don't have the prescription or the piece of paper or the authorization, it's a Schedule 1 drug. But it's interesting because it's
all the same plant.
And that's my point of what I'm saying, of why sort of the medical cannabis, the plant doesn't know nor necessarily care. But before we had any of this, in the 1850s, there was a Scottish doctor that was using cannabis in a institution to treat psychosis. He was giving his psychotic patients cannabis and they all stabilized. He won a national award. They created a whole programming schedule that was supposed to be rolled out across the NHS.
Didn't you write about that?
That's in part of this script. I couldn't find any of, as it were, our sort of modern cannabis writers writing about it. I actually got it from, hopefully, fingers crossed, future guest, Scottish professor James Mills, who has written extensively. This guy knows cannabis prohibition inside and out. He's really setting about my whole thing to bring attention to this. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, my whole thing is, especially in the U.S., I mean, California was the first state to have cannabis as medicine in 1996.
And that was Prop 64.
The minute they called it recreational, we fumbled because it's not recreational. The reason California became legal for medicine is because of a doctor named Todd McEury. He was hired. I'm getting full body chills. I haven't mentioned Todd's name in a long time. I hope he's nearby. He was a California MD who got on board for cannabis and started writing scripts for the medical program. But before that, he was hired in the late 1960s by the U.S. government to debunk cannabis as medicine. He took less than a year to work on this project for the U.S. government, figured out that it was indeed cannabis, wrote a totally opposite paper that the government rejected, resigned his position, spent the rest of his life advocating for the plant, and he was one of the co-authors of making cannabis legal in California, the first to do so. Now, the pushback was that it's a lie, it's not medicine, they're just saying this to get high. And that mindset lasted the entire medical program in California and every other state that has medicine. It's a very sad thing. So when a state legalizes, for instance, I covered Colorado and Washington State before and after legalization. What really happens when a state legalizes, everything's set up wrong because it's all set up for recreation and it's not, it's medicine. So when a patient, if someone like me who has sleep issues, hormonal depression, all pain, chronic pain, all the basics, right? Even if you're diabetic with high blood sugar numbers, if you take that edible just to get high for recreation, you're going to have a better night's sleep. You're going to have less pain. You're going to go, oh my God, this is medicine. It doesn't take long for it to happen. Mm-hmm. So what legalization does is it creates an atmosphere and opens a door for people to try things. Mm-hmm. But the laws are set up for recreation. It's not the same as alcohol. It's not a recreational product. It's medicine. So, I mean, let's just have one example, right? Valium. Valium was replaced for me with chamomile. But most people I interview who don't have a general understanding of cannabis as medicine in depth, who only are still smoking, they'll say, well, I'm not really a patient. I just smoke at the end of the day to chill. Well, what else would you do at the end of the day to chill? You take a Valium, maybe barbiturates, painkillers. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So again, we come back to harm reduction and education on knowing what exactly it is, you know.
It's exactly that. It opens up a door that's quite scary to a lot of people, in that actually conceptually, it's very difficult to say that there are recreational drugs in general, because all drugs in some way pacify a pain. They cease and stop physical pain and neurological pain, spiritual pain and emotional pain and personal pain. And do you know what I mean? It lessens, it washes that person away from the trauma of their current reality. And I agree with you that ubiquitous education across the board for me and access to everything would mean you could sell heroin at every shop, but people would choose other products along the way. That again, people would understand the walnut sledgehammer kind of metaphor of going, well, actually, I've got a slight bit of an ache here, but okay, so maybe I take something for the pain, but I also holistically need to look at why I've got the pain. Oh, it turns out one of my shoes is knackered, so my walking gait is off and it's hurting my back. Do you know what I mean? Or it's I'm not sleeping. I'm not sleeping right, so I need to look at that. And
do doctors ask you about that? Do you have a holistic?
Of course,
a doctor a little bit enlightened that's going to ask you about that thing. You know, most doctors just prescribe the pills. You know,
they are legal drug dealers. So this is the situation we're in the UK. So it's
not their fault. I don't blame the doctors. There was a surgeon in the U.S. There still is, Dr. David Allen. He sat down on the phone and called, I think, 100 and something medical schools in the United States and asked them, do you have the endocannabinoid system in your curriculum? Anything about the endocannabinoid system, let alone cannabis. He wanted to know if doctors are being educated to the fact that if they have spinach for dinner, it's going to address all of their biological organs, adding to homeostasis in the body or a place where illness cannot dwell. If you add fruits and vegetables to your diet for 2 weeks, your endorphins will be lifted, dopamine will be created in your brain. Vegans, on a vegan diet, they have so many mental and emotional issues righted because of this. So I think I trailed off a little bit on that one, but
but
I answered the question.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you that I truly don't believe there are evil people, or I believe there are evil acts, right. And I believe that people can be manipulated and gamed. And
I didn't finish that thought. I didn't finish. I remembered. I started Alan calling all the medical schools. So out of 100 and something, I did a meme on this, 121 medical schools called, only a fraction even mentioned the ECS. Nothing was deep into the curriculum. So he verified that doctors are not being educated in the U.S. that we know of, that was that he did. They're not being educated on how plants work with our biological systems to create homeostasis.
That's with, in the
it's
UK.
not their fault.
Yeah, and in the UK it's even worse because the NHS and the government have basically demonized homeopathy. They've demonized anything that doesn't fit within this single symptom, single compound result mechanism that they've sort of tried to create.
They're in business, they cross-market their drugs to make money. They're in a business for profit, they're not like the holistic caregivers that take care of their community, in rural areas, it's just not like that anymore.
Yeah, and I think we had Eddie Lepp's widow, Sandra Lepp, on not that long ago, and I've had a few sort of people of that kind of era, and it was people like that their work, the doctor's able to give people the scripts, that meant they could go and source the weed, but it was the people that was producing the weed and the oils and learning the skill set for. Unfortunately, some of those doctors did end up in kind of racket positions, down on Venice Beach. They're like few doctors' offices, and you'd sign up in one spot, and you'd go into the next.
I wrote about those. I went in and interviewed one of those guys for my Weed Traveler series for Weed World, Venice Beach. I did a Weed Traveler Venice Beach. You can read it online. And I went in and interviewed one of those guys, and he was a young doctor, early 30s, fresh out of med school, MDs today in the U.S., if you just go to a regular doctor's office and work somewhere, you're only making 50, 60 a year, or maybe a little bit more, but not too much. And so they make a lot of money in these card mills. And so I went in and interviewed him, a young guy, and he had no idea about medicine. And I came in there going, well, I used to be in mainstream, and this was in Los Angeles, where I was in television. I said, well, I used to be in TV. my cancer, told him my whole 101. He couldn't believe it. I mean, when you witness like that one-on-one with someone, I call it evangelizing. I think it's biblical, we evangelize cannabis to each other, to people, because when you know a truth and tell them. So if I ever have a chance to interview doctors, I've interviewed many doctors, and it's awesome. The ones that really take the time to learn and understand. But this guy was mind blown. And I said, you think you're handing out cards to people saying they have back pain, for just to get high, but it's not true. It's study. Amanda Ryman. There's Amanda Ryman. She got a PhD with a focus in cannabis, so she could be taken seriously after she was helped with cannabis. I did a higher profile on her, my series for High Times. It's online. You can read it. And she did a study because they were saying, we're watching 30-something-year-old young men going into dispensaries just to get high. There's nothing wrong with them. They're prime of their life. They're healthy. Well, Amanda went and did a study. She was going to UC Berkeley, I think, at the time, and she made it a thesis paper or something. And she did a survey, and she found that young men in their 30s, man, they were in football in high school. They might be in construction. They might be working in a warehouse situation where they're having back problems. They have chronic pain. And she disproved that, myth that was politicized at the time, just wanting to get high and lying about chronic pain. So.
Yeah, it's just such an irony in that where a lot of where California was back then is kind of where the UK is now, in that it's ironic the patients are having to game the doctors that think that and the doctors think that they're trying to get high, and the patients know that they need the access to then get better, and they know actually how to use this. So it's in such a weird position.
Well, let me give my own doctor in Humboldt County as an example. So my MD, she's a woman, she's lovely. She's not there anymore. I think she moved up further north to Oregon or something, but she didn't know anything about cannabis. She came from somewhere else. She got that gig there, and she was an MD, and she knew that people were growing weed up there. She knew that a large percentage of her patients were cannabis users. She didn't know how to talk to them. And I had only been a stoner from the 70s. So when I started taking that cannabis oil, she learned with me. I mean, the oncologist learned too, and so did the technicians in the room. But my MD learned. She saw that I did away with the sleeping pill. She saw that I did away with the painkiller. And that whole year, that first year when I was doing cannabis oil every night, because I've been doing it every night for 10 years now to keep the cancer away and to keep homeostasis in my body. But I would just like if I had a yeast infection, I would put my coconut cannabis up there, and overnight it would be gone. And so the next day, that was something I'd have to go into the office and get a prescription and see her and and it was like that, boom, 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 everything. And I would just send her an email and say, hey, I had this thing, I did this, it worked. So she learned from me. And I wrote a little article for High Times. It's online, How to Talk to Your Doctor. And I based it on Regina Nelson's book, How to Talk to Your Doctor. And she also got a PhD with a focus on cannabis, so she would be heard talking about cannabis as medicine. And it's important that you tell your doctor. I mean, if you're going through chemotherapy and you're taking the cannabis oil along with it, and you're not sick and your appetite's good, you need to tell your doctor, this is helping. And then if people that do the cannabis oil with the chemo, the cancer goes away faster. It goes away. They keep the chemo treatments going. You have the option of stopping it. Melissa Etheridge, the musician, singer-songwriter here in the U.S., she did that. She started, Stephen Stills, the singers, told her to do cannabis because she was a good girl. Even in her tours, she didn't do drugs. She didn't, she was a good girl. She didn't do any of that stuff. She didn't smoke weed. And Stephen Stills got her on weed when she went through her chemo treatments for breast cancer. And when the cancer left, she just kept on with the cannabis and told the oncologist, I'm not doing anymore. And it's important to note, I don't know if this is the same in the UK, but in the US, oncologists are the only doctor in the whole country, in the whole medical industry, that buy their chemotherapy drugs and radiation drugs and all that at wholesale and can charge back a profit to their patients. That's the only doctor that can do that with these drugs. So I don't know. It doesn't sound good, does it?
That's insane. It's obviously with the NHS, everything's there's still a lot of cronyism, corruption, and all the rest of it, obviously, with the conservative sort of trying to dismantle it over the past decade and a half.
I like to say,
that's crazy.
I like to say accidental corruption. I think we've just, over the decades, just dug ourselves deeper and deeper, and by our own hand, adding toxins to our environment. Plastics alone was a stupid idea.
Yeah, well, plastics are one of those things that actually, again, if you want to look at it without getting too conspiratorial, the plant-based polymers that were being produced by Ford and Co. At the time, as in Henry Ford and others, not a business called Ford and Co., just to clarify that for the record, they were far more mass manufacturable, they were far more beneficial. That was where we were going to go, but it was DuPont and others with their investments sort of in petroleum that were actually like, no, byproduct that we can make plastics, not even direct product. So using crude.
It all came from Rockefeller. It all came from Rockefeller.
That's what, the centralized sort of funding of it and the individual.
Now, I want to talk about Ford and Edison with their plant-based laboratory in Florida. I want to talk about that. But
sure,
first, what was the other thing we just said? What did you say?
We're talking about plastic, prior plastic. You were saying about corrupting sort of the environment.
Yeah. Oh, Rockefeller. I want to talk about Edison and Ford, so remind me about that later. But
okay,
the Edison and Ford car that allegedly was made all with hemp. That's not true. I did a deep dive on that in that article that has not been published. What was the other thing? I'm sorry. Maybe I should smoke. I would focus better, probably.
I find I always do. That's why I smoke 2 joints during the podcast every week.
Well, I'm ADHD, so I need to smoke to write. I've never written anything, even for TV or anything, without smoking.
I'm the same. I've just been re-diagnosed with ADHD as an adult because nobody decided to tell me for 20 years, apparently.
Well, it's got so many weird symptoms. It should actually just be put on the spectrum because the symptoms are so similar to
that's exactly
problems.
Yeah, well, I'm on a waiting list.
But anyway, let me talk about
Henry Ford's car.
Let's talk about Edison and Ford and their friendship. They lived next door to each other in summer houses in Florida. They built a laboratory where they were successfully creating fuel and manufacturing material out of plants, not just hemp. Industrial hemp is what they were using. All kinds of plants. And I had a list in this story I did. And they were on it. It was going to happen. They had the money and the wherewithal to do it, and it was going to happen. And the lab mysteriously burned to the ground. And then Rockefeller funded Ford's oil-laden car. And you can't make that shit.
It's interesting because it's the same.
Ford's, if I could just add this little anecdotal story that I love. Ford's wife said, "Oh my God, I like the plant car better. This thing sputters." I mean, people don't realize those first cars, the oil would get all over. That's why they had to wear those jackets and the hats. Remember, they were all dressed up with gloves. It was a dirty, dirty thing. And how dirty it was initially was a premonition for the future. It's, it was awful. And it was funded by Rockefeller, and their plant lab just was burned to the ground. And I don't know, we can only assume, right? It sounds
it's interesting because you're very suspect, because in Europe at a similar time, there was supposed to be the diesel fuel unification conference in London, which was basically a giant conference where they were bringing over the technologies, because obviously the internal combustion engine had kind of been designed, or the petroleum-based combustion engine had been designed. There were various different patterns, so we're trying to standardize. So we're going to come to London, everyone was going to bring what they've got. There was a German, I believe, called Rudolf Diesel, hence where the name sort of came from. He fell off a boat, from what I recall from reading on this, and his patent ended up in the hands of one of the American mass manufacturers. But
gee whiz, what a huge coincidence!
The engine he designed, was supposed to run on biofuels from byproducts of cannabis, flax, and soybean, which were also the byproduct materials they were looking at creating the composite materials for the car for.
Same kind of stuff Edison was doing with Ford. Yeah.
So it was supposed to go into the vehicle. From what I've read, obviously, as you say, a lot of this is really difficult because of how history's been recorded around all of this. And
bleached. It's been bleached. That's why I could never finish that piece. It was too hard. It was really hard. I will one day, though.
That's where I'm at with this whole opium thing as well at the minute, because you've got the various bits about, as you mentioned, Rose and Sears, they ended up selling, it was Bayer's heroin in the 1898 catalogue that they then started selling, which...
And, heroin at its purest form is not bad. I mean, it's better than opioids. It's certain heroin, if I didn't have cannabis oil available, I would choose heroin as an end-of-life care because, again, you're more alert in there than with the morphine or the fentanyl or the opioids. You're gone after that stuff starts.
Yeah, it was exactly that. It was considered clean. Actually, to go back, I suppose, to one of our angles and narratives that we were speaking of before, that when the invention of the hypodermic needle, it was this whole reason that cannabis medicines in the US is supposedly have fallen out of favor was the lack of standardization. Whereas
that was a demonization. That was a demonization trick. Mm-hmm. There is standardization with plant medicine, but one plant is not the same as the other. The compound structure is the same. All the compounds are there. Every batch has to be tested. With synthetic formulated pharmaceuticals, it's not like that. They can be more precise. With plants, they grow from the ground. They're influenced by the sun, whatever they're influenced by. You can take a shit Mexican seed, and you can grow a beautiful, fragrant, high terpene plant because you're going to baby it. So talk about inconsistency. There is inconsistency, but you know what? As long as you get that full terpene cannabinoid profile, you're going to be healed. It's going to help you. To be a stickler on the exact formulation every single batch is silly when you're talking about plants.
As you say, exactly that's what I was going to go on to, is that it ultimately was a marketing gimmick and trick, and that's exactly
Thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
That's all right, and that's kind of where we are in the UK right now, in the... It feels to me that the system that they've rolled out here has been paid for, designed, and supported by Big Pharma so that they can accrue the data sets back and then go, all right, we've got 100,000 or 100 people with fibromyalgia. They're taking on average these cultivars. From that, we know these terpene profiles, these whatever. They then can create their single compound patented product. They can then obviously keep cannabis illegal. So I think that it's designed to crash. I had a confrontation with a doctor earlier this year, and he said to me, to my face, in 5 years, this industry won't be here, as in them prescribing flower, because they don't see flower as medicine. They're just trying to get enough people exposed to cannabis.
That's that doctor's ignorance. That's that particular doctor's ignorance and lack of education.
No, but I think he's right, because in the UK is going to be very different to the rest of the world. We don't want cannabis flowers. They're the last thing they want to give us is a recreational market. They want a medicinal market that is pills, potions, and non-smellables. So we're not allowed to
compost over here.
We can only...
Right?
But it's not, though, because we've been doing the research and leading. If you look at GW, we are the world leaders in the production of this in terms of the patents. GW was 184, I think, last time I counted. Yeah. They are a huge player in this. You then look at our government; they've been invested in this since the cannabis, the Royal Commission into cannabis in, ironically, 1996, which was triggered because of California creating a legal access to so-called medicinal marijuana over in the States. And so, it's kind of kickstarted this thing. And whereas now mainland Europe and the EU, which we're now not a part of thanks to Brexit, they're looking at creating an American-style market. Whereas here in the UK, there is this ownership of Big Pharma. We are a hugely overprescribed country because, as you said before, you can go to a doctor and he doesn't ask you how you're sleeping, how are your personal relationships, how's your job, are you stressed? They don't care about any of that.
No. They don't know about whole body.
Well, not even that. I think that the establishment, because Little England or the UK in whole is smaller than the average American state, over countless generations, and we've been the world drug dealers since the 1600s. We were the first country to figure out, wait a minute, we can enslave a population, criminalize drugs, then let them have the drugs, make the money, and then kill them. Do you know what I mean? We figured that out in Mauritius. We then instituted it into India. We then put it all across our colonies in form what now is South Africa, across all of the plantations that we're not plantations, the sugar beeting plantations and stuff that we produced. And yeah, we've been doing it and rocking it ever since. So I think England will not let go of this. We will not allow that liberalization. And so at the minute, like in the UK, there's many people that are getting their scripts now revoked because they've used cannabis that isn't prescribed to them when they've run out. Well, cannabis has been prescribed and hasn't been good enough, you know?
I'm just going to add another layer to this because I'm not going to be afraid that this industry is going to go in that direction, because there are still people like me. There's thousands of people like me who do apothecary at home now and who teach their communities and friends and family how to make medicine from plants. And there's a lot of people that use the whole plant. And my remedies that I make at home are more potent, powerful, whatever, more of the plant in it than most of the remedies that are found in the retail markets. I mean, I think some products that are very good out there, but it's just like cooking at home. Anything you make at home is always better. I just think, and that's why I hang on to that hashtag of mine, illegally healed, because as a writer in the cannabis community full time, I can't afford dispensaries. I never could. I mean, it was very hard for me as a writer. So that's why I became an apothecary and started making my own medicine and remedies. And it's a financial thing. And I don't know if you guys know in what Whole Foods is in the US. It's a fancy, elite, organic market with beautiful food, but it's very expensive. And I've always likened shopping at dispensaries to shopping at Whole Foods. You have to have money to be able to do it. So I think in that respect, there's many markets that will continue. The black market is alive and well. I don't even like calling it the illicit or black market. It's plants that are coming from farms that are going to caregivers, that are going to remedy makers, being shared. And this is how it always has been with the plant. And we just made a mess of it. Humans make a mess of things. We do. We are not, I mean, I like to say humans, not the sharpest tool in the species shed. We always mess it up. But I hold in my heart that there will still be a faction of people that use the whole plant, that make meds at home, and that the industry can't touch, because the plant fails. It's God's plant, and we as a species up the THC, we created the controversy. I've written this many, many times. You've probably seen me posting about it. We created this controversy, the God plant. Do you know the story about CBD? Lawrence Ringo in Southern Humboldt?
No.
Mother of CBD? Not many people know. I was the only one to write about it so far because we lost him a few years ago. So do you remember when Sanjay Gupta, CNN, did his documentary Weed, and they introduced the Stanley brothers in Denver and Charlotte Figge, Charlotte's Web, and CBD?
Yeah.
Well, when they did that, they could not say that they crossed state lines with these plants from Southern Humboldt, from Lawrence Ringo, a 30-year back-to-the-lander farmer. They couldn't say where it came from. It took Ringo almost 15 years to hybridize the THC back down. He kept taking his low THC plants and putting them together and hybridizing the THC back down because he had bone-on-bone back pain. And he didn't want to be high all day. He had been hybridizing the THC up for 30 years along with everyone else, not just Southern Humboldt, but over in Amsterdam too. For decades, that THC was risen from 4 to 5% up to now 30-something right today. So he kept doing this. It took him many, many years. And in the final analysis, he had a product that was low THC, maybe 4 or 5%, and it took care of his back pain. So he was like, this is amazing. So they sent it into Steep Hill Labs. I think it was Steep Hill at the time, Samantha. And they were all on a conference call. And when she announced, and she said, well, yeah, your THC is down to 4%, but you still have the full terpene cannabinoid profile from the cannabis plant, just a low THC. But she said the bonus is your cannabidiol, CBD, is measuring at 14%. It was a surprise to everyone. They had no idea. So when the Stanley brothers bought these plants, they spent an hour with their assistant, who I ended up interviewing later. And she said, I just couldn't get it through to them. This is what it is. It's a whole plant, medicinal plant, just like the God plant. Lawrence Ringo always said, I'm hybridizing it back down to the God plant, because we know that the cannabis used in holy anointing oil wasn't 30%. It was 4% or less. This is how it was. I mean, when I started smoking in the 70s, the Mexican ragweed was probably only 5%. And if you've ever smoked a 5% cannabis, it's fine. It's awesome. I mean, this high THC thing. But the irony is THC was isolated in the late 1960s, by Dr. McClune from Israel. Mm-hmm. And they found that was a major compound that kills cancer cells. So when we make our cannabis oil to treat cancer and serious ailment, it's upwards of 80-90% THC for a reason, because that's the formulation that puts cancer into remission that we know of.
Yeah, well, the studies are generally looking at the THC as predominantly the main compound in causing apoptosis in the cells. So the cells are basically triggered an automated suicide, which would naturally occur if the environment that they were in wasn't carcinogenic. Normally everybody, we all have cancerous free radical cells. It's just whether your body is then susceptible to it. So there's a lot of argument for the prophylactic consumption of cannabis as a anti-canceral drug. This is something that I've argued for a long time, considering we now eat credit cards with a plastic a week on average as a human. It's now raining people microplastics. We're on the verge of nanoplastics being found in places like your brain, which is again another place that's going to be quite scary. The endocrine disruptive compounds, obviously highly carcinogenic in and of themselves, contain things like BPA, BPZ. And
this is why we don't say cannabis cures cancer. This is why we say it puts it into remission, because we have been subjected through our lineage, through our bloodlines for generations from toxins that are carcinogenic. So we're never going to get rid of it. I mean, DDT alone, that's from my lineage, my great-grandmother's farm. They sprayed. My mom talked about dancing under the spray of DDT. Everyone on the farm died from cancers. I'm the only one in my family, even several generations later, that hasn't had to go through that cancer thing in older age because of the plant. My sister went through the same breast cancer I did 3 years prior, same exact lobular, the spider web in the lobes. She had to have partial mastectomy, chemo, follow-up radiation. She was sick for a long time, lost all her hair. I didn't have to go through that. So
yeah. The other thing that I think obviously needs pointing out here for folks is there is a school of research that is looking at hormonal driven cancers, in which case they're finding the balance is to put more CBD. There's something about higher THC that is aggression.
Nope. That's a myth. We have not seen that in the cannabis caregiving community whatsoever.
So that's being pushed by mainstream academia here in the UK.
No. 4-to-1 is the ratio. Using up to 4 to 6 cultivars per batch to ensure a high cannabinoid terpene profile is important. But no, it's high THC, not high CBD. We have someone Corey Yelland. Follow her on YouTube. It's Cannabis Health Radio on YouTube. Actually, you should probably interview her. We went into remission in the same year, found each other on Facebook. She was given months to live and made the cannabis oil at home on her stovetop in small batches. She's in British Columbia. And she has spent the last 10 years helping people. And she posts all the time. And Cannabis Health Radio, they talk about it all the time. And she just posted last week, I shared it on my Facebook page, that 5 women had died from doing a high CBD formulation instead of the high THC. 5 women. She had to report this. So
that's pretty scary. Then that literally, I'm looking at even one of the NCBI pages here of that. It's spoke of that if it's hormonal driven, that there needs to be more balance of the CBD to THC.
My cancer was hormonal driven.
I know that's why it was interesting, and I just thought it was worth sort of bringing up this.
It's very dangerous. So Tracy Ryan, I don't know if you know about Tracy and Sophie Ryan, her daughter. I've been writing about Sophie since she was a year and a half. At 9 months, she started doing cannabis oil for brain tumors, and she's 7, 8, 9 now, and doing very well. The worst part about brain tumors being put into remission with babies like that, with children, is the scar tissue remaining. So she lost a lot of her eyesight, her motor skills, things like that. But she's still alive and with us. Tracy was interviewed on a show in America called The Doctors. I don't know if they recycle that over to the UK.
I don't think so.
But she was on there being interviewed, and ironically, I was being interviewed for a segment and field producer position, because that's what I used to do in TV. And I was talking to an executive producer at the time for me coming on just to help with the cannabis segments. And then Tracy's show aired, and they cut out everything about THC. They only mentioned CBD. And I wrote an email to the executive producer I had been interviewing with, hopeful for this job, but that wasn't going to happen now. And so I wrote an email and I said, do you know how dangerous it is that you just told on national television to millions of people that CBD alone has helped this little girl with a brain tumor? Do you know how dangerous that is? So yeah, this is what we're up against. They don't want to mention THC because, federally it's illegal. And
I don't even think it's federally because it's illegal, because if they were really worried about high, etc., then they wouldn't have written the Farming Hemp Act, or whatever it was called, the 2018 one in the States, backed by Jeff Sessions, that basically created this market for HHC, THCP, and any and all derivative and chemically convertible cannabinoid compound. That was a lot of C's and I liked it.
Yeah. Well, the Delta 8, that's legal in Texas now. I just wrote about that.
Yeah, it's mental. I've just
and they're happy about it. Are you kidding? They're happy to be able to do anything like that legally.
But it's crazy though. So what's the cops think then down into, because Texas is obviously made.
I don't know. It's one of those gray areas right now. I don't know how long it's going to take them to regroup on that one, but hopefully they're going in the direction of legalization there anyway. There's enough advocates there fighting for it. We'll see what happens with Texas. I mean, more conservative states have flipped, so we'll see what happens. The plant always prevails. The plant always prevails.
Agreed. Although it's interesting, there's been a bit of this year I think is the first time I've seen a slowdown or a pushback from the system. Obviously, the states that voted no in November were, as you say, quite conservative. And actually, I'd like to think that some of it was because their initiatives weren't good enough. There was no expungement. There was no real access. It was a placation at best. It was very first foot in the door. It wasn't very brave and bold.
It's politicking at its finest, because the people in America, I think the percentage now of Americans that want legalization nationally is 69%. I mean, how can you continue a prohibition when it's more than 50%? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and even now, I think since the 20th state coming on board, over 50% of Americans, because of the way the population falls, already have legal access anyway. So if that's then the case, obviously America's quite a unique position in compared to the rest of the world with states' rights, etc. So I think that there will be some regrouping. One thing that I have seen that actually ties into this has been by the way, sorry for my guests, this is what happens when two ADHD people have a conversation. Clearly, we're running this over. We've been talking over an hour, but it's wonderful because I'm keeping track. There's a file of different conversations we're having, and we keep just jumping from one to the other. I imagine, imagine for the average person looking at this going, okay. But yeah, to jump back to something that's also relevant to this, so we're going to converge on this point. Oregon, have you seen their proposed bill for next year, seeking to double prison time and raise maximum fines for people cultivating more than 100 plants without license? So 10 years. Oh,
without license, yeah, they're coming down on all those. If you don't have a license, you're in trouble. That's all there is to it. You're still underground if you don't have a license.
So where's the line? So how many plants is Oregon personal cultivation?
I don't know all their details anymore. I just don't know. But I know that if you don't have a license, I can't write about you, right? So I mean, it's the sad part.
It's frustrating because
legalization means that a lot of people went under. I mean, Humboldt County alone,
it's four plants.
The estimated amount of cannabis farmers in Humboldt County alone, pre-legalization, was estimated by the county to be 25,000 Was it 25,000? I can't remember the numbers now. It was such a huge amount of numbers. And then in the final analysis now with license in Southern Humboldt, I think they only have, God, I don't know, 100, 250 left. It's astounding. We went from tens of thousands to, and the thing is, in the medical market, we didn't have a supply and, distribution problem. We had plenty of supply and demand. We had distribution. Everyone was making money. Add legalization and ordinances and call it a recreational substance, and all the taxing involved and all the packaging involved because you're treating it like a criminal product has just killed people financially. Killed people.
But it's set up a very lucrative system for people in these new packaging regulations, delivery, distribution, financing. Well, yeah, it's because they're doing is instead of the legacy industry, and they're going, all right, we're going to bring you into the mainstream. What they then go is, right, what we're going to do is create this industry for us, and we're just going to slowly take and pick off you until we get something that we own and operate.
Well, they're not even picking off of them. The legacy farmers can't do this. I mean, the legacy farmers were used to getting $3,000 to $4,000 a pound during the medical market, okay? And right now they're only getting $300 to $400 a pound. You can't live on that. Now, the difference between cannabis farmers in America legally trying to survive and food farmers in America is that if a food farmer has a bad year or fails or isn't getting money at the market, the federal government will give them a subsidy. That's been set up for decades now. Cannabis farmers have nothing, so they're just failing. And the legacy farmers are the most heartbreaking among them. I mean, I've written about them the most. I've visited them myself up in Northern California the last 2 years. I've stayed on the farms and talked with them and gotten to know them. And it costs more to grow a pound than to sell it for $400. I mean, trimming alone, people used to get $100 a day, $100 a pound to trim. And how can you pay a trimmer $100 for a pound if you're only getting $300 to $400? It makes no sense. So, and the night before legalization in California alone, because that's my state where I'm from, they took away the 1 acre rule. Now, a lot of people were up in arms about that, because that 1 acre rule would have saved the legacy farmers, right? That's what everyone thinks. But I was also told by farmers up there, they had farms more than 1 acre. People were growing a lot under the medical market. So it's just a conundrum at this point. It's a conundrum. Plus, there's not enough access points. So when a state legalizes in the United States, cities and counties are allowed to opt out. They're allowed to ban. If you're a conservative city or county in a progressive state that has allowed cannabis, you can say no. And that's another problem for the farmers because there's not enough distribution access points legally. So a lot of them are still putting things out in the open market illegally because of this,
Yeah, it's a very grey space. I've been lucky enough to travel around quite a few states. In 2018, I did like 6,000 miles and landed in Colorado and went through California and Oregon and Washington.
Oh, nice.
And I was lucky enough to visit Massachusetts not long after they'd sort of gone as well.
Boston.
Yeah, loved Boston as a city, was very impressed, but it ended up walking away just constantly emulating the Boston accent to the point where when I hear somebody... when I hear somebody in a movie or whatever, my brain instantly goes, Boston! And I was like, fuck's sake.
Boston.
But yeah, beautiful place. But the infancy of their system was ridiculous. It was hundreds of miles from where I was to a dispensary. And
I know.
And we ended up doing a little tour of the East Coast. I think we went to is it Maryland? Is that the one at the top?
Mm-hmm.
We ended up going up there to an underground event that was being held in like a pub that was just a cannabis market, and we went and cured and saw the guys up there. And
even in illegal states, you can network and find your community and your tribe in cannabis. I covered Paris for Dope magazine several years ago, and France is not legal still. And I was able to, score weed and network with cannabis activists there and advocates, and it was everywhere. It's just everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly that. Before we had these legal systems, we've always been there. And as you said before, of the people will protect the plant, no matter how bad it gets. There are countries around the world where it was firing squad for moving cannabis. And guess what? People kept moving cannabis and kept protecting it, kept speaking her name.
Because you can't stop the healing. You can't deny the healing. You just can't. I mean, that first night I took the oil, I didn't need a sleeping pill. I slept 10 hours. I never slept 10 hours prior to that in years, probably, because I had been menopausal with thyroid disease for 13 years at that point with thyroid disease. I couldn't sleep. And first night, 10 hours. I mean, you can't deny that. You can't. Why would you want to go back to sleeping pills after that kind of experience? And I got REMs on that stuff. Sleeping pills, you don't get REMs. So you can't deny it. You just can't. That's why it's progressed. Only word of mouth that cannabis oil has progressed. Word of mouth globally, only in 20 years. It's only been 20 years or less since Rick Simpson found that recipe online and recreated it. And the recipe he found online was called honey oil in the 70s. It was a smokable product.
Yeah.
He decided to ingest it. I mean, it's really something, isn't it?
It shows, like I said, the evolution. We were talking about before the THC being in the breeding of humans. We're now seeing some amazing projects actually in this issue's Weed World, where you were writing about Jim Belushi, if I recall correctly. I was writing about a project out in Pakistan. They're in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and
I saw that.
They're mapping genetics, and they're basically discovering that actually when the British split Pakistan and India, obviously there's a lot of, we hand up as a British person, we've done a lot of terrible shit, not me personally, but under this flag and its monarchy especially, which fuck the monarchy, have done some pretty horrible things. In doing this, they basically forced a lot of the tribal regions to change in the area, not just where they'd drawn a border, but in other places. Some of the Balochistan tribe, they brought with them genetics that originally are said to have come from Iran, so it would be sort of Mesopotamia. And we were talking before about the anointing oils and whatever, is that they're starting to do exactly that, to breed back, to reverse. Obviously, we've got a lot of people reversing genetics in the so-called recreational or adult use market as breeders, doing some wonderful work moving forward, and then back crossing to stabilize. But these guys are really trying to get to ancient cannabis, what you've termed sort of the God plant. I think that's what holds a great interest for me is what is that like? Because I feel that no matter what cultivar I'm experiencing from the modern market, it feels it's narrowing. Whereas the weed I tried as a teenager, as a youngin', which was just crap bush weed still, with seeds and all the rest of it, that had more to it. It felt a fuller experience. Whereas I know, obviously, now as we were saying, that it's the same with me if I hit just a THC vape, like a distillate vape or something like that. It's a very narrow high.
Well, everyone tries to define your experience with cannabis with THC, but that's not the thing. It's a terpene. That scent and the flavor is where the medicine is. It's also where your emotion comes from. It's what the scent and the flavor is what triggers your limbic system for memory and emotion. And that's what it's all about. THC just gets in the way.
I
love THC. I mean, I smoke. I'm a bong girl. I've got my little mermaid bong from my bud vase here today. I'll take a hit on that before we hang up. But I'm a bong girl. I love my big hits because I'm menopausal and thyroid disease. My hormonal stuff. I need big doses. That's why I do the concentrates. But it's all about the THC. It's about those flavors. It's about that scent, because the terpenes are what creates your mood and your vibe. And it's not an indica sativa, right? We know this. There are broadleaf plants and narrowleaf plants, but it's the terpene profile that gives you your emotional and physiological reaction.
Yeah, and I think that's now being measured to is I'm working with quite a few people, quite a few Scottish folk. I'm not going to shout out because we do a lot of quiet work. But they're working on basically its ratios, mapping ratios. So this is where, because we can speak in our quite esoteric and abstract language and ways of our experience, but then the layman comes along and are like, what the hell are you on about? If I smell that, it'll do, like, what? Whereas what we're trying to quantify now is ratio percentages. So we're mapping terpenes, we're mapping sequester terpenes, we're then mapping cannabinoids, minor cannabinoids. That's still not telling us jack shit. We then need to understand the ratios that they work in as to then how that synergy works on our endocannabinoid system, thus giving
you can't explain magic. You just can't. And
they're trying to quantify it. It's just, I think what this project, and I know a couple of projects are working on, is it's not so much for the academic and scholastic pursuit to be able to document it. It's more to be able to go, well, all right, if I can take any cultivar, run it through a system of analysis and get this bit of information and know to my experience and my endocannabinoid system how it'll work. So it's basically, if you then take, say, it just allows for the correlation of cultivars and their properties, as a crude way of describing it, to be mapped into much smaller groups. And then I'm like XYZ, and that's, you look for XYZ in the other cultivars. Do you know what I mean?
Phylos Bioscience in Portland, in Oregon. You'll want to write down that name if you're not familiar. Phylos Bioscience. They've been mapping the genome of cannabis for years, and they have what's called the galaxy of cultivars. And like, take a blue dream, and where does that come from? And it's a whole galaxy. It's really cool the way they've done it. They've also broken down properties of terpenes and cannabinoids, like you're talking of. And then they started getting controversial when because if a grower wanted the high times cut for a blue dream, you don't know if that's really a blue dream. It might not really be. You have to break it down and test it. So that's what they've done. They've done all this stuff. And so now they know the characteristics from all these different cultivars, like you're saying, how it affects this and that. And they're using that model now in breeding, taking the best terpenes and cannabinoids from the best cultivars that they've broken down to create, custom type cultivars with custom type terpene, whatever. That's what they're doing. And then the farmers got upset. They thought, what? You're taking my cultivars. You're taking my genetics. No, that's not what they did. They just looked at the
mapping it effectively.
Yeah, they looked at the range and built it.
And I think that's where then this whole, again, in the UK, we're really very behind the times. And so our doctors are prescribing based on sativa, indica, CBD, THC.
No, you have to look at the terpenes.
Of course, but we're not allowed to talk about terpenes. So our cannabis in the UK is irradiated. They're saying to destroy any mold and whatever else in it.
Oh, God, what a shame.
But there is the allegations, again, allegedly, that the irradiation then destroys a good 30 to 50% of the terpene profile.
Well, when they started irradiating fruits and vegetables, same thing. That's why we all went to organic. It's like, gosh. Most of the fruits and vegetables that we enjoy in the mass market, in the big box grocery stores, they all are the same thing. They're all hybridized over the decades for transportation and to retain color. They're not for their profile of beneficial compounds.
Yeah, nutrition is a byproduct. They are.
If they pick a tomato green, they spray it with something to make it red. And that brings us back to the sun and legacy farmers. And I'd really like to bring this thing up. A year ago, the top researcher at Columbia University in the United States went to Southern Humboldt, worked with legacy farmers, got seeds from a crop, took those same seeds, did a controlled study, a scientific controlled study. They grew in one crop indoor, one crop outdoor. Now, we've always known, being up in Northern California around where the cannabis grows in the sun, we've always known that it has a higher terpene profile. You can just smell it. You can taste it. You can tell. Now we know, this researcher at Columbia has proven that it is far superior outdoor grown in the sun. And, think about it, a tomato, greenhouse or sun, that sun, the flavor comes from the sun. You can't mimic it. You can't. And the only reason cannabis was brought indoors, only reason is because the helicopters with the federal government started and they had to hide. That plant was not meant to be grown inside. It has to, the sun makes it superior. So what this study will do is hopefully, I think it should give more money per pound to the legacy outdoor grown and the sun growers. They have to get more money for it. It's a far superior product. So High Times is waiting for me to write the story. He's trying to get it on mainstream platforms first, and he's publishing it in, technical journals first. But to have that study.
It makes the most sense. And it was one of the things that really quite made me happy that when I visited Oregon at the time in 2018, in that I was able to pick up some what they were considering dirt cheap outdoor, and I'm looking at that going, all right, this is $50 for an ounce of outdoor blue.
I know, right?
Grown on the southern border of Oregon. Or you're going to charge me whatever it was, which wasn't even that much more expensive for indoor light deprived. And I'm looking at it going, all right, yeah, you're screwing me, mate. Sure. Exactly that, because they're still mapping it based on, this outdoor's not going to, it's basically, there's a limited potential. So if you up the THC on one side, that's space that can't be taken up by your terpene profile, your minor cannabinoid profile. And we as informed connoisseurs and consumers will be aware of that, and then can look at these large numbers and go, well, yeah, but where's the rest of it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you end up with that quite limited experience. And that's what I was sort of saying before about these products that are just designed as just THC sort of extracts. For me, it's just my frontal lobe goes, I am high, but I am not medicated or relieved in the same way that if I can combust a joint, like I can vape flower all day long, but it will not do anything for me compared to the first 3 draws of a combusted pure joint. There's just nothing touches it for me.
Same thing with CBD isolate. They isolate the CBD and they just have that in there. It's like you need all those 400 compounds surrounding it in the plant to have the full effect. And my favorite quote was by Rhea Graham up in Albany, Oregon, of Albany's Canna Kitchen. She said, ingesting a CBD isolate is like eating the skin off the seed of an apple and throwing the whole apple away. It's not, you need the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, you guys were starting to know more of the efficacy and its uptake sort of in the body, and how, again, a lot of this has been mass marketed and manipulated. So in the UK, I don't know about sort of the States, we went through a huge period in let's call it 2014 to 2020, where CBD was everywhere and it was everything. And then all of a sudden it became in everything. There was fucking, what did I read? Infused pillows, sachets, CBD sachets that went into a fucking pillow to help
toilet paper.
Yeah.
And infused toilet paper. I have CBD soap right now in my kitchen sink. And I just think it's wasteful,
it's interesting. CBG and CBD isolates actually quite antibacterial, antimicrobial, so quite functional.
Yes, all the superfoods are.
So again, is those extracts? Sorry, my camera is going crazy again.
I know, you're blinking.
I'm not sure what it is. I'm gonna take this whole thing apart, because after this episode, I'm off for the holidays.
Nice holiday.
January.
You're gonna make your Christmas hats, your paper hats?
We get them out of crackers. Get the paper hats. I'm lazy. I don't make stuff. I struggle enough to write and do this bloody thing.
Letts is Letts of London. That's my father's side lineage. Then my mother's maiden name was Eyre, like Jane Eyre, Eyre, and she's Lancashire County. Yeah,
I'm not far from Lancashire. I'm up in
really?
Durham.
Yeah, I've been to England a couple times. I love it. I love London. I love the countryside the best, of course. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of the UK that isn't London. London's very much a place unto itself in a lot of ways, actually. Although it's interesting, it seems to be the epicenter of the new cannabis industry, whether we want it to be or not, really. But I think that's where most of England's money lies. So industry follows capital and vice versa. So.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't actually think I've asked you any of the questions that are on my list here, so I'm going to glance down and have a look, see what we've got.
Our ADHD strikes again.
I always love these conversations where they just flow. It's always good fun. We've covered actually most of the things that I was going to ask you about. Here's an interesting question. Do you think that we're living in a golden age of sort of cannabis journalism and media? Because
Jesus, no. I'm in a green bubble. I can only write for cannabis magazines because I write the anecdotal stories of healing. I write patient profiles, and I cannot put those in mainstream media right now. So I'm in a green bubble. The mainstream, the masses in America won't know the healing stories of cannabis. They don't know. I think one day I was on an NBC site on YouTube or something, and I was possessed to put down my cancer story because we were talking about cancer. And oh my God, I've never been hated on so badly in my entire life. I couldn't believe it. People I didn't even know on these comments were just hating. What an idiot I was. I was crazy. What I'm saying, weed cures cancer. Am I a nutcase? The masses just have no idea because, we're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose in a lot of ways it was quite a loaded question, really. As I think what I was trying to open up was sort of a conversation about obviously from where we've been, even the utterance of the word cannabis in print media it had to be in the crime section, it had to be in a derogatory sort of manner, and if it wasn't, then that could be a problem. I think I remember. Is it Nature magazine you get, or National Geographic? I think you guys got over there. They did a cannabis issue. They did a thing on cannabis.
I remember that.
And they got some serious shit for it. And then obviously we've had High Times for quite a long time. Obviously, Weed World. Shout out to your guys at Weed World.
Sam and Phil.
I don't know if we're supposed to name them, but yeah,
I've written for them going on 12 years now.
Wow, I've been writing for about 5 years. But yeah, they're good people, real good people. They've been going since 1991 when Phil first released. Actually, it was Drug World was the first issue, and
it was a seed catalog.
They were basically beaten into submission and went, all right, Weed World, just weed. We'll forget the other drugs. Other drugs don't exist. La la la.
I know.
But obviously, we've had that evolution now of time. That there are so many other different magazines and publications. Obviously, you write for quite a lot of them, from sort of things like Cannabis Now.
Well, the sad part is they don't pay real well. So for me to do this full time, I'm on Social Security now, thank goodness. But 7 years ago, I had to. I moved down to Baja California, Mexico, because it's cheaper down here to live. I have a tiny house now near the beach for $500 a month. So this is, and my Social Security subsidizes with my stories that I write. So it's easier for me to live down here, but I could not have continued this work full time for the past 10 years living in the US.
Yeah.
It's just no money in it. And that's why you don't see in-depth stories. And I'm a dinosaur because I write long form features. They're people don't read. So now I'm considering most of my series I'm writing, like my higher profile series on High Times. I'm considering my long form features now historical documentation. I'm documenting the history of a lot of OGs, what we call OGs now, the old guys in the industry, the old people in the industry that have been here a long time, the advocates, stuff like that. I'm trying to keep my higher profile series like that. And all my series, I just try and get it all down, while I can.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's exactly what I'm doing with this project, with the podcast. It's what I've been doing for years now. I can't make a living at this in the UK because we don't have a legal market. And the market that is legal, I'm kind of at war with 90% of the time because it's based on half-truths, manipulations, lies, marketing gimmicks, and trickery. And I'm gonna speak truth about this plant till the day I die because it is, as you said, the same. I'm lucky enough, touch wood, there's some wood near somewhere. I've not had cancer. I've not had to go through that, but I've gone through my own struggles with my mental health, and cannabis, along with other plant medicines, have been there for me and really turned around what was a career patient. I was stuck within these systems. I'm still within these systems in some way or another, but to a much lesser degree and with much more autonomy, for all I'm currently being quite stigmatized by them for being very open and honest about my drug use. But I'm just trying to do the same, to document sort of where we are, so that when my hope is that I do the same. I write long format. I do these podcasts long format because I believe that it's the best way to grab a real, genuine impression of the person, of the story, of the. I
liken all of us to that film, Steven Spielberg's film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They all had this vision. They all had this vision of that little mountain. Remember, people had to make it in clay. They had to draw it. They had to go there. We're all kind of called for this plant,
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we want to see reformed within this space, then I think, yeah, I agree. Far better pay considering the amount that we know is in advertising within
That'd be
this
nice.
space.
Well, right now I want a book deal. I've got 10 book concepts. All these series I've written all these years, I can make books out of so many of them. I'd love to have a book deal. Television's my background. I have a TV series, a pilot that I wrote with a screenwriter friend of mine in LA called Cannabis that's based on fiction based on fact from my 10 years in Humboldt of the anecdotal stories of healing and about the farmers and things like that. And actually, Jim Belushi right now has the script and he's looking at it. So that would be nice. Because when I was visiting with Mr. Belushi on his farm this past October, for the my Weed Traveler series for Weed World, he said, we were talking about all these anecdotal stories, and he started saying, people are telling him all the time now. Everywhere he goes now, he's told these stories of healing. And he said, gosh, I wish we had a vehicle that could tell these stories of healing without being a documentary or newsy or being preachy. And I said, well, that's Cannabis. So we're kind of revisiting that again because it's fiction based on fact of amazing stories of healing and farming and everything else up in Northern California. So we'll see. I would like that. I would love a little TV show in my lifetime before I die. That'd be nice. But a book deal would be nice too. I got a literary agent and they said that I don't have enough followers on Instagram. I only have like 5,000 followers. I'm not an influencer. I'm a reluctant influencer. I'm read by millions globally, but I'm not one of those people that are on video all day long on Instagram. So I've only got 5,000 followers. So if anyone watching wants to follow me on Instagram, it'd be nice. But I guess today, it doesn't matter about your body of work as a writer. You have to be popular on social media. So that's kind of made me sad last year that I heard that. So I would like to get a book. That'd be nice.
No, I think that would be great too as well. I think that's a brilliant conceptual idea as a way to bring these stories to the consciousness of the masses without having it to be either fact-checked and verified because it's a documentary, because it's all within the realm of nonfiction. And it allows for the emotion, the raw emotion, because you can live those stories rather than having to have them recanted by the individual. For all they can portray their emotion after the fact, to have actors portray live time in a chronology, I think will give serious empathy, not just beyond them as cannabis consumers, but to go, wait a minute, if I was in that position, I would try anything. So of course, and to really put them into that position. And I think that is something that is missed by these mainstream legalization mechanisms right now. Is it's too busy creating consumers, and it's not enough about the why and the how of the individuals. Because for all, there are kids now that are growing up that only know disposable vapes and only know all of this quality sensimelia, high grade, over 20-30% whatever cannabinoids. They've not known where it's come from. So unless there are these stories that are told, not just in this whitewashing and gentrifying kind of way that we're seeing from some individuals in certain sectors of society, I'm not going to name anybody at all to save my own grace here, but that are coming along and kind of going, well, we did this, we were the ones that did this, and this is us, and that's us. And it's like, just because the police destroyed the documents, raided the farms, it's same as Edison and Ford, as you were alluding to before, just because the building burnt down doesn't mean it didn't happen. And this is why this media type, I think, is so vital. I'm the same. I've been working at this for about 8 years. I've been in this space. I've only been doing media production as in sort of podcasting, I suppose, since the lockdowns during COVID. Shit, I said the C word. That's going to get this tagged on fucking Spotify. But yes.
But you're doing historical documentation with this podcast, and I appreciate that too.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do is bring in lifetime as well, the different generations. And it's not just sort of cannabis. So we've had sort of doctors and academics working in like sex work reform, working in human rights, in other drugs. And I'm trying, my body of my work, whether it ever becomes successful or not, at the end of it, I'm looking to do the same, is that I'll have built enough through experience that then I can produce books, I can produce other long form content that is then verified through what I've actually done. And so right now it's just about bringing the 19-year-old listeners I've got and the 60-year-old listeners I've got and the different generations together, and to go, you may have different words for it, you may act in different ways, your gang signs might be different in it, you might have all the different colloquial terms or whatever, but these are still humans seeking to protect the plant that has helped you, whether that's
right.
with your roadman bag or whatever. It doesn't matter how you dress, how you act, how you appear. The plant has spoke to you.
Right.
And I think that this is what this medium can do. And I do hope that our greed bubble can become more honest. So for all we're still talking in the echo chamber, I want the CEOs of these companies that are now floating on stock exchanges around the world, standing on stages saying medical this, medical that way for the patients, to actually be held to account, to be able to, it's not just fluff pieces. It's not just, do you know what I mean? There needs to be that hard journalism needs to be injected into this space, because there are some amazing truth tellers that, like you say, are never going to get the light of day because they're not an influencer. I'm the same. For all I've had influence, I don't seek and court a large audience base. I'm just trying to seek truth. And then I'm living my life in real time. Is the same as you said. I don't make a killing off what I do at all. I make a loss in the podcast.
It's a calling. It's a calling. Yeah. We're called. Yeah. We're called to the plant. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's then just a case of finding what we can do for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How we can bring our talents together.
Yeah. Well, speaking truth is important. It is.
It is indeed. It is indeed. It is an interesting one, actually, I suppose, with journalists. We're talking about hard journalism here. Brittany Griner was obviously recently released in a prisoner swap. Thoughts?
It's upsetting. It's upsetting because we have people in prison still in the U.S. for this plant. Mm-hmm. So it was very upsetting. I mean, I wanted her to come home. I'm all for the swap, whatever works. There's still a guy sitting there, though. I can't think of his name right now, but we still have
Mark Fogel.
Okay, yeah, he's still there. So this was a real politicking, man. It was politicking. But I'm glad she came home. She should come home. You know, she uses a vape pen for chronic pain because she's an athlete. Mm-hmm. So that part of the conversation wasn't really discussed in the news, right? I mean, if I ever arrested, I think it's an international story for one thing, and they're forced to talk about how I crossed over from mainstream media because cannabis oil put my breast cancer into remission, right? Mm-hmm. So I wish that the mainstream media would have picked up more on why she had the oil, why she had the pen, you know, because she's an athlete and she has pain. So, yeah, it's frustrating. Very frustrating.
It is indeed, yeah. And like you said, there's an article here I'll share from, I don't know if it's the best of sources, but it's the one that I happen to have open from Politico, discussing the case of Mark Fogel. So he's a 61-year-old, I believe, English teacher or some form of teacher that was out in Russia.
He was English as a second language or something teacher there. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was caught with, they found 14 grams, half ounce of what was verified as, I suppose, as equal to medical marijuana. It was prescribed. He had the correct paperwork, and serving a similar sentence. And he wasn't caught up in this. It was just a direct sort of prisoner swap. But it's the thing that concerns me is I don't want to say disproportionate nature of it, because for Brittany, obviously, this is tragic. This is life-changing to end up in a foreign prison in quite a draconian state and to have been so greatly politicized.
It must have been terrifying.
Agreed. And so I'm again.
And they cut her dreads. And that's spiritual. So that was really sad. That was that's her power. So that was sad. Yeah.
Yes. So for that, I'm mortified. But the trade of a war criminal. I don't know if anybody's seen the film Lord of War, Nicolas Cage. I recommend it. Highly entertaining film. That is based on Nicholas Orloff, or whatever his name is, the guy that they've basically swapped for. And he's an arms dealer that for the fall of the Soviet Union and he's got connections in Africa and around the world, and people in the alternative media space. I'm not going to put a spectrum of political inclination on this because it seems to be across both spheres. Is the timing of this, when the US is alleged to have been trying to prolong the confrontation in Ukraine, that then giving Russia an asset of an arms dealer and a man that is connected with nations around the world and knows how to smuggle weaponry.
So if I can just say, my battery's getting low, so I might have to wrap this up pretty soon. It's going to take me a little bit to redo it. But it's not our place to say who they traded. It's disappointing, yes. They gave us who they gave us to get her home. You know what I mean? I'm not going to criticize. I don't know anything, right? But I'm glad she's home, and I wish they would talk about that she's medicating for pain. I wish, you know.
Yeah, but I suppose that opens up a larger conversation that they're not really willing to have at that national level in the US right now. You have these pockets of conversations, but
I mean, we can't even get banking yet. So, it's what multi-billion-dollar industry do you know that doesn't have a bank account? It's just, we're backwards. We're just backwards.
The SAFE Act has collapsed again, hasn't it? From my brief looking, the Senate has kind of pushed it back again, which would have been obviously the allowance for federal banking. I know obviously California is still subject to effectively armored theft. They do hire veterans and military personnel, or former military personnel, I should clarify, to use armored vehicles to transport cash, yet the feds are still then targeting these vehicles to seize that money under federal forfeiture laws. You've obviously got various sheriff departments acting quite rogue in some places, so it's all still
the sheriff departments are subsidized. Local police are subsidized by the federal government, even though they're in legal states. It's very complicated.
Yeah, and so obviously asset forfeiture, I said that the wrong way, means that they can basically, kind of seize and auction off and fund things through.
Right. I'm going to lose you in a minute, just to let you know. My battery's going. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Sorry, I could waffle on. In that case, then let's wrap up. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Sharon. I'll include links to your website and various things in the bio.
SharonLetts.com, Sharon Letts on Instagram, Twitter. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Yes. Me too. Sorry for it coming to an abrupt end. I should have really listened before when you did say your battery was dying. I apologize for that.
No, it was great. All good.
That's great. Lovely talking to you. I'll let you know this will be going out probably within the next 24 hours, actually, because I haven't had an episode this week.
Awesome.
So, I'll get you tagged up.
Thank you, and happy holidays.
You too. Wonderful. All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Peace. Well, there you go, folks. That was Sharon Letts. That was a bit ADHD, I think is a way to describe that. There was a bit all over the place. I do apologize to anybody that couldn't follow that conversation. I think my brain struggled to follow that conversation at a few different points. But I think we touched on quite a lot of different topics. We got to know Sharon there. We got to know kind of how she sort of transferred into the cannabis space from the mainstream and kind of what she's seeking to do. Some interesting insights into sort of cannabis media, I thought, at the end there. And yeah, just a good conversation. I'll include some links to this Politico article about Mark Fogel, the potential Oregon legislation that has been put forward as well. We'll put some stuff in there about, I've got a note that I've made here. Made a note here to put in some details about cancer, hormone-driven cancers and cannabinoids as well. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one, folks. We'll be taking the next 2 weeks off because it's Christmas and New Year, and it's bloody hard to book guests, and I don't want to interrupt anybody's holidays because there's a lot of people who work bloody hard in this space and deserve to have a rest, myself included, frankly. So I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. I hope you have a wonderful holidays. And yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, or you enjoy what I do here, please give it a like, share, subscribe. Check us out on all social media platforms at The Simpa Life. If you really enjoyed this, check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep the many lights on in this project. And I think what I'm going to be doing is spending the next couple of months of Patreon money to replace this camera because it has done my tits in. So yeah, any new patrons, really welcome. All right, folks, have a great one. I will see you later. Peace and love.